Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining the LinkedIn Live on the latest release from the Workplace Gender Equality Agency's annual employer census. I'm Mary Wooldridge. I'm the CEO at WGEA and very pleased to give you some of the highlights and answer a few questions. I want to take the opportunity at the start to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the many lands we're coming together from right across the country. Also, just as a matter of housekeeping, please put any questions into the chat or into the comments on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to answer some questions after I've given you just a few highlights. This is a 15-minute session, so we'll make sure that we keep it to time, short and sharp. So overall, the news is it's good that the gender pay gap still continues to come down. It's come down 0.6 of a percentage point, so not huge, but still trending in the right direction. And let me give you some numbers to make it clear. The new gender pay gap is 21.8, and it's made up of two things. One, first of all, it's a reduction from a year ago of 0.6 percentage points because of action that's happening in the workplace and in terms of employee wages and composition. But it also includes an increase of 0.7 percentage points because for the first time we're including CEO and head of business remuneration. So the result is good in terms of it's coming down, but we now have a new number to calibrate the reflection of what really is happening in the workplace now that we have those highly paid roles included in our gender pay gap calculations as well. So while the numbers are coming down and what it represents for every dollar on average man earns, a woman is earning 78 cents. And that's more than $28,000 on average each and every year. That is the differential between the two. We have seen that the good news is that many employers are taking action, and we believe this is in anticipation of the publishing of gender pay gaps, which we did at the end of February. So the time period this covers is largely prior to that publication, but we believe it's been a motivational effect because we've seen a dramatic increase in the proportion of employers who are doing a gender pay gap analysis, those who are taking action on that analysis that's been done, and importantly also a dramatic increase in the proportion of employers who are consulting with their employees on gender equality issues. And all of these are critical first steps to understanding what's happening with your gender pay gap and having the insights of what needs to change and being able to put together an action plan to address it. So very positive results in that context in relation to we would expect to see the translation of the impact of that over the months and years to come as that analysis, as those insights, as those action plans are put into place and get underway and start to translate to outcomes in terms of gender equality. What we haven't seen change is that those things on pay and composition that we need to see. So importantly, we still see that men are 1.9 times more likely to be in the top pay quartile than women, and women are 50% more likely to be in the lowest pay quartile than men. And that hasn't shifted over this last 12-month period. We do need to see those changes. But interestingly, in talking about the lowest pay quartile, it's important to note that of the 0.6 percentage point reduction in the gender pay gap that we've seen, a significant proportion of that is contributed by increases in the wages of low-paid workers. So particularly in residential aged care, but also we've seen it in retail and accommodation and food services. So the lifting of those wages in those largely feminised industries, and particularly from an aged care perspective, highly feminised industries, that has contributed to a narrowing of the gap. And that's, as I say, a positive response in terms of seeing that we've got to operate not just the obvious and ongoing focus that we have and that many employers have of women into senior roles, which are important, but also making sure we're very conscious of low-paid workers in those feminised industries, predominantly women, and the need to lift those wages as well to narrow the gender pay gap. So that is a high-level picture. The last thing I want to touch on is that in terms of the results from today, let me know your questions. I'm sure there's many other things we can go into, is the fact that for the employer average remuneration gender pay gap, the midpoint of all employers, gender pay gap is at 12.1%. So that means that half of all employers have a gender pay gap higher than that, and obviously half lower. Now, we say a range of plus or minus 5% is what we call neutral in terms of the gender pay gap. So much work to go in terms of employers' gender pay gaps coming down from that midpoint of 12.1. And we will be publishing sort of late February, early March, the next employer gender pay gap specific results. And I know people will be looking out for them then. So 2 call outs. One is that all of the information that we have published today, which is our scorecard, the national and industry results, but also we've also released a new data explorer, which has those national industry results, but importantly has the employer results for over 7,000 employers. And it has all their information except for the gender pay gaps. But it does have information on workplace composition. It has information on board composition policies across all of the gender equality indicators that we capture information on employee consultation, the incidents and the policies and practices in relation to sexual harassment as well. So please go to the Data Explorer, have a look at the national industry results, but also individual employers. And finally, just wanted to mention very excitedly that just literally an hour ago, there was introduced into Parliament a new bill that will enable an amendment to our Act that enables us to require companies, larger companies with 500 or more employees, to set targets and make progress and achieve those targets in terms of our gender equality indicators once again. So exciting times with that happening today as well. That is another major recommendation of the review of the Workplace Gender Equality Act. So lots happening, and I'm now going to go to questions and see what's happening and let me work through some of them. And we've got lots of great questions, so really, really appreciate that. So in terms of a question in relation to how many companies, there are around 7,400 companies or employers represented in this scorecard who have reported to us. And it's a little bit different from last year in terms of the data. We used to report information on what's called a submission group, the way that companies report to us, which might have multiple companies in one submission group. We've now looked through the submission group, so we can now go to each employer with 100 or more employees, even those within a corporate group that have reported to us together. So that gives you an idea of the numbers, which is great. So in terms of just the gender pay gaps, just confirming, so there's 2 numbers that are being talked about today. The 21.1% is the gender pay gap without CEO and head of business remuneration. 21.8 includes it, and that's our new baseline going forward. So there's been a reduction, but then an increase because of new data that's included, and we'll use the 21.8 as our baseline going forward. So Some other questions that we're seeing is, are there emerging themes regarding actions in terms of organisations to drive outcomes? And the thing that's really interesting, and appreciate the question there, is that there's no silver bullet and there's no right answer for every company. But what we do know is doing gender pay gap analysis and putting in place the action plan is absolutely critical. So 68% of companies have done the gender pay gap analysis, 2/3 have done it, 1/3 still to go. So do the analysis, and what that shows is those insights of where the challenge is. Is it a recruitment challenge, a promotion challenge, a retention challenge? Where are those gaps? Are they hidden in job types or in different classes of employees? What's happening in terms of your promotion to the senior levels and so on? So very different outcomes depending on the industry, depending on the employer often, and different priorities in terms of what to work on. In terms of, let me just try a few other questions here. Now, do the data include casual and independent contract workers such as delivery workers? How we capture information and how companies are required to report to us is employees that they employ, and it does need to be an employment contract. It can be a casual contract in Australia. If you're a contractor working in one company but employed by another, it's the company that employs you that actually provides the information to us. So, and they need to have 100 or more employees. So that's the threshold. Some of you may not be able to find the company that you're interested in looking at on the Data Explorer, and there can be a number of reasons for that. It might be that they're required to report to us, but they haven't, and so they're non-compliant with the Act. It may be that they're required to report to us, but we don't know them. So we always do take information or emails from people telling us about employers who are required but haven't yet connected to us. And it may be, a range of other things. And we've got some details on the website if you can't find a particular employer. So in terms of publishing gender pay gaps, we're still, for next year, as you recall, we did it right at the end of Feb this year, and we expect a similar timing next year in terms of either the last week of Feb, early March. We're just finalising the details, and there'll be information on the website to confirm that when we get there. Now, other questions, notable movements in different sectors, particularly gender segregated industries. And we haven't seen, and first of all, I'd say there's an enormous amount of information. So we're still working through the detailed analytics in a whole range of things. And there's the opportunity on the website to have a look, and also link to last year's Data Explorer if you want to do some comparison between the two. So, but what some industries do stand out in terms of, and they're not surprising. In the masculinized industries, obviously the construction sector still has a long way to go, and they're doing some good work as an industry as well as individual employers to try and make inroads on that. Financial services still continues to stand out with having balanced workforces, but still very high gender pay gaps, and that need to make sure that women are participating at all levels of the organisation as men are, and it's not just men in high-paying roles and women in low-paying roles. In terms of public sector gender pay gaps, we'll also be publishing them early next year, and our scorecard for them. They're just completing their reporting, and we'll be pulling that information together. So looking forward to publishing them soon after we publish the private sector one. Now, there's a good question around the international aspects of the gender pay gap, and for the first time we've been able to capture some further information that we haven't had before, and that's been age of employee and also location of employee. And you'll see in our scorecard some high-level results by age groups and also on a state basis. It'll give us the opportunity to do further analysis and dig into that information and get some insights on what that information about location and age says. There is further work happening in terms of other aspects of diversity and also broader definitions of gender. At the moment, our Act requires us to have a definition of gender as male and female, and we while we collected voluntarily, we want to be able to formally collect broader definition of gender in our data. And we're also doing some more work in terms of looking at other aspects of diversity, although there's some very serious privacy aspects in all of that. That we have to be very careful of and to make sure that it's captured appropriately. So lots of great questions coming up, but I'm conscious we are also coming to time very shortly. And just one last one on CEO REM, just so everyone understands, it's captured all the way through. So we are now reporting for this year's data on the Data Explorer, the CEO remuneration included in that industry analysis and so on. It does have a big impact on the average gender pay gaps, but less so on the median. So when you're comparing year to year to last year, say an industry midpoint, with the median comparison, it's much more straightforward and not influenced by the CEO remuneration outcomes. So all very positive. We don't, very good question at the end, tying in the scorecard release with the target setting bill that's into the Parliament today, is that do we have a national target for the gender pay gap? We don't. We certainly talk about plus or minus 5%. And at the moment, we've only got just on 20% of employers who have a gender pay gap in that plus or minus 5% range. So still a long way to go. The very clear articulation on a national front is to accelerate the rate of change to reduce the gender pay gap. And we're certainly challenging employers to get to within that plus or minus 5% range. For some, they're close. For others, there's a long way to go. So it will take time, but we're positive the momentum continues. Really appreciate your interest. Any of the outstanding questions we'll try and answer online through LinkedIn. Thanks for being with us today. And once again, have a look at the scorecard, download that and have a look. Data Explorer is such an amazing wealth of information. Please use it. Give us your feedback if there's things you can't find, or because it's brand new, launched this morning. Give us your feedback as we continue to refine and make this information accessible so that we can all be part of the momentum to reduce the gender pay gap and create better and more equal workplaces and workplace experiences for all. Thanks very much for being part of today.